My name is Bob Whelan, and my business is a company called SmartWhere, and we are focused on trying to leverage mobile technology in small to medium-sized business, which is kind of what I did through the 90s and early 2000s for larger businesses. So the idea is to be able to leverage that kind of technology in smaller businesses. And the technology has kind of made itself more viable or more available for or practical for small businesses now. So that's what we're focused on.
How do you define success?
Well, that's a moving target, I think. I think you have to be more specific. For me, I think if you take it in the for perspective of something like financial, I've never been that motivated by money. Perhaps I wish I had been more motivated by money, but I'm really not. My financial goals have always been to make enough money to minimize the amount of decisions that I make based on money. So that's really my financial objectives. So I'm not really sure. In other areas, I guess success for me is being able to spend my time doing something that I enjoy doing. So it kind of goes along with the previous comment in that if I have to focus on things like money, I'm not focusing on the things that I like to do. So that's really where I am.
Where did your inspiration come from?
That's presumptuous. I think what happened to me, and the reason that I started heading down the path of building businesses, is that there were things that I wanted to do, and I didn't think anybody would hire me and let me do those things, right? So the only one who would let me do it is me. So so it was a path of least resistance, I suppose, a path where I could go off and focus on the things that I wanted to do. I guess that's kind of the running theme, is being able to do what you want to do. And I had kind of started off early when I was 16 or 17, I can't remember. I was doing some plastic fabrication for like Joby water skis, and I decided I wanted to make this product, and I couldn't afford an injection mold, so I was trying to fabricate these plastic things that my kids they enjoy giving me a bad time about it. I was building this thing called a hair dryer holder out of plastic, and trying to sell it to places like Pay and Save, and at the time it was fairly novel, and but I decided that that I needed to get some other skills to try and build a business. So I started trying to get out, and I'm not an outgoing person, so I had to go out and try to learn to sell products and go out and knock on doors, and that kind of just led me off in a particular direction. But that wasn't really the question, was it? I think that if I had to say where my inspiration came from, I think it's more a matter of, I think a lot of people are simply afraid to go out on their own. So I think it's more a matter of not being afraid. And I think the reason I'm not afraid is probably the fact that when I was 14 years old, my father started a business. And so it didn't seem intimidating to me. It seemed like a natural sort of thing to do. And the timing was good. I mean, when you're very young, you don't have a lot of responsibilities or financial constraints or overhead. So I think that that's probably where it came from. Watching the fact that my father was starting a business made me not afraid of the idea, coupled with the fact that I wanted to do things that no one was going to let me do. Except me.
How did you move from idea to something actually succeeding in the market?
Slowly. Well, everything I've done has been on a shoestring, so which I actually like because it gets back to you have this constant validation. When you go out and, not that there's anything wrong with going out and raising money and starting a well-capitalized business, but one of the advantages, if there is any, of being a shoestring is that you're kind of forced to validate your product every day. And I like that. I like that. I think the hardest time for me was the point at which later on in business where we thought that it was okay to lose money. And that's a weird thing. I think it's nice to be in a business that has value, and then you kind of build upon that, and it's again that constant sort of validation. So I think we were a typical software company that built things for people, and every company that builds things for people wants to become a products company, and we made that migration in the early 90s, and again, it was just showing up at the front door.
How did you organize your team?
That's a good question. Well, I started pretty young in business, and so most of the people who I hired were a lot older than I was, and so it was more like convincing them that they should work for me. And so I think I had the attitude early on that that I needed my employees more than they needed me, and in terms of trying to organize a team, that presumes kind of a level of organization that may not have really been there. So it was more a matter of trying to find a group of bright people and go try to tackle a particular job, and not getting over our heads, or at least too much over our heads, and particularly again, not being in too big of a rush.
If you could have, what would you have done differently?
That's a trick question. What wouldn't I have done differently is probably a shorter list. There's a lot of things. I did start off too young, probably, if that can be the case. And I think I would have spent more time. I would have taken my time a little more. I was in a rush. I was in a rush I was just in a rush in general. Beyond that, I think, as I mentioned earlier, I think I really enjoy being in a business where we have kind of that ongoing and constant validation of our market value through the fact that we have to make payroll, and I'm pretty happy to make payroll for 25 years in a row. But I think that we did get caught up a little bit in the 2000 era when people started thinking that you were valued by a number of employees and a bunch of crazy metrics that everyone knew was crazy, and somehow justified you not being profitable. And I just think that's just insane, and I would not repeat that. I wouldn't go down that path. Not only for myself, but also for the people that worked for me. It was, it's just, it's not a sustainable model. Sometimes you struck it rich and some crazy things happen, but I think I would have done that differently. What else would I have done? As I mentioned, I was kind of in a rush. So I bailed out of school because I was making money, and I believed I was learning more on my own than I was learning at school. So in computer sciences, I was writing an inventory control system that I ended up selling to the Bartell Drugs of the world and stuff like that. versus, the computer science courses that existed at the time in 1977, 78, 79 at the University of Washington were, IBM 360 sort of, barely out of the punch card era. And it seemed less useful and practical. And the same thing applied to, economics. I spent a quarter learning about demand curves, and like I've said several times already, a good demand curve is just walking up to the front door and saying, hey, you want one of these, or I can make one of these for you. And, I don't have the budget of a Johnson & Johnson to come up with a demand curve. So, but again, that was really in a rush. The reality is I would have been better off finishing school. I mean, I've gone back and I think I have enough credits to graduate. They just aren't in a major, although the nice people at the UW have offered to make a major for me so that I can graduate, which I hope to take them up on in the not too distant future. But I think everything that I would have been able to accomplish would have waited for me, and I think that it would have been in several ways easier.
What makes a great entrepreneur?
I'll tell you when I find out. Well, that's a good question. I think a lack of fear, I suppose. A lot of people are just too afraid to fail, and it's really not that bad to fail. You don't really want it to be too public, but if you fail when you're young, it's pretty easy to get over. So I think that most of the people we probably admire out there in the business world probably have had their set of failures, at least the first generation folks. So I'm not really sure what makes a great entrepreneur. I think the traditional tenacity, I suppose, or it's probably stupidity, really. There's probably not knowing any better. So,
what role did education have in your success?
Well, I think the question implies traditional education, formal education, and it didn't play as much of a role as I would like it to have. But the fact of the matter is that I love to learn. As a matter of fact, I become really bored in a situation where I am not trying to solve some particular problem or trying to learn something. And I think that that's one of the most intriguing parts about business is there is so much to learn. Not all of it is all of that interesting, but as a whole, I mean, there's just a great body of knowledge to.
What's the most important question we didn't ask you and your answer?
That is also a good question. I think perhaps it's whether or not it's a good path to go down. Is it something that I would recommend to other people to try to build a business? And I think there's a lot of people for whom I wouldn't recommend going off and being in their own business. It can be kind of stressful, and it can be intimidating, and more importantly, it can be distracting. My father always taught me to envy the firemen who work 72 hours on and then 4 days off, and they were always the baseball coach and that sort of thing, and I didn't do enough of that. I tended to get absorbed in my work, which I loved, and I was distracted from things that later on I had more of an opportunity to spend time with, like my family, and I realized that I probably needed more balance in my life than I had. So being focused on something's great, but there's definitely, more to life than that. And I would probably take more time for other things.